I sentence you to imprisonment for 24 years, commencing on 30 August 2022 and expiring on 29 August 2046.
An ordinary evening, one last phone call to her mother, then a woman vanished completely, without a single trace. 36 years. That is how long a man lived freely, after his wife disappeared without a trace. A man who didn't even bother reporting her missing for 6 full weeks. No body, no crime scene, no weapon. Just one explanation he gave, and no one able to prove otherwise. Until a podcast series, listened to by tens of millions of people around the world, achieved what an entire investigation system couldn't manage in almost 4 decades. This is the story of Lynette Dawson, a woman never found, and of the journey to bring her husband before justice, made possible by nothing more than the power of a story told the right way. Lynette Sims and Chris Dawson met at a high school function in 1965, when both were just 16. Chris was a promising rugby league player at the time, later turning professional for the Newtown Jets over many years. Lynette trained in nursing, qualifying at the Children's Hospital in Sydney. In 1970, at 21, the two married at St. Jude's Church in Randwick, Sydney. In the years that followed, the couple welcomed 2 daughters while building their own home in Bayview on Sydney's northern beaches. After retiring from professional sport, Chris moved into teaching physical education at a high school in the Northern Beaches area. To those around them, this was once a happy young family, bonded since their schoolyard days, building a stable life together in the very area where they'd both grown up. From 1972 to 1978, Chris Dawson played professionally for the Newtown Jets, alongside his identical twin brother, also a rugby league player. The twins drew enough public interest to be featured on a national television documentary in 1975, along with both their wives, sharing about the special bond between twin brothers. Friends and relatives of Lynette later remembered her as a strong woman, devoted to her family, always putting her 2 young daughters first in every decision she made. While teaching at the high school, Chris Dawson developed an inappropriate relationship with an underage female student, later given the pseudonym JC by the court to protect her identity. She had also worked as a babysitter for the Dawson family's 2 daughters. In late 1981, due to upheaval in her own family circumstances, JC moved in temporarily with the Dawson family, at Chris's invitation. Lynette discovered the relationship and confronted JC about it directly. JC's presence in what had once been the Dawson family's peaceful home quietly created a deep rift, one that within just a few short weeks afterwards would lead to an irreversible tragedy. By late 1981, there were signs that Chris Dawson and JC had at one point intended to move together to another state, to start a new life, before that plan was suddenly called off and the two returned to Sydney. These developments, when looked back on later during the investigation, painted a picture of just how deep the relationship had become. During the very period the marriage between Chris and Lynette was falling apart. On 8th of January 1982, Lynette and Chris attended a marriage counseling session together. That evening, Lynette called her mother, Helena Sims, the last time the family would ever hear her voice. After that call, Lynette Dawson vanished from all contact entirely, leaving no trace behind. According to Chris's account, the next morning, he drove his wife to a bus stop in the Mona Vale area so she could go shopping. He then went to work a shift as a lifeguard at Northbridge Baths, a public pool where Lynette was expected to meet him and her mother-in-law, as arranged beforehand. But she never showed up to that meeting. Just 2 days later, JC formally moved into the Dawson family home, the very place Lynette had once called her own. From that night on, no one, not even Lynette's family or closest friends, ever saw her or heard any verified news from her again. Lynette's mother, Helena Sims, later recounted that her daughter's voice on that final call had sounded completely normal, with no sign of distress or worry that could have hinted at what was about to happen. It was precisely that normality in the last phone call that made it so hard for Lynette's family to accept the explanation that she had simply chosen to walk away from everything, with no warning at all. In his first statements to police, Chris Dawson insisted his wife had left the family of her own accord, following marital disputes over spending on the family credit card. He also suggested to investigators that Lynette may have joined some kind of religious group, voluntarily leaving her previous life behind. He further claimed that, after her disappearance, Lynette had called him several times, though no one else was ever able to confirm these calls. From the very beginning, these explanations left more than a few of Lynette's family and friends deeply skeptical, particularly given how close she had always been to her two young daughters and her family. The idea that such a devoted mother could suddenly abandon everything without a word of goodbye was something those closest to her could never accept. Lynette's close friends also spoke out, insisting she had never shown any sign of wanting to leave her current life, and that leaving behind all her clothes, identification documents, and other important personal items was entirely out of character for a woman always so careful and deliberate. These small, yet deeply inconsistent details were gradually noted and held onto by Lynette's family over the years, becoming the foundation for their unwavering belief that something terrible had happened to her, right inside her own home. One detail many later found hard to explain was that Chris Dawson did not report his wife missing until a full 6 weeks after she disappeared. It wasn't until 18 February 1982 that he went to Mona Vale Police Station to formally report the matter. That unusually long period of silence later became one of the most notable details raised by investigators and prosecutors throughout the legal proceedings. By late March 1982, a short notice appeared in a major Sydney newspaper calling for Lynette to get back in touch with her family, published just one day after what would have been the couple's 12th wedding anniversary. For many who later followed the case, this only made the overall picture harder to reconcile. A heartfelt public appeal on one hand, and 6 weeks of complete silence to authorities on the other. During those 6 weeks, local police also received a few calls expressing concern from people who knew the family, but with no formal report yet made by an immediate relative, these calls did not lead to any specific investigative action at the time. This is also one of the points that, when the case was later reviewed more thoroughly, investigators realized had allowed a great deal of important evidence to potentially disappear for good, before anyone had grasped just how serious the matter truly was. In 1983, Chris Dawson formally finalized his divorce from Lynette, even while she remained officially missing. In 1984, he married JC, and by the end of that year, the two had moved to Queensland. In 1985, the couple welcomed a daughter. By the early 1990s, the relationship between Dawson and JC had broken down, and JC moved back to Sydney. While Chris Dawson carried on with his new life, Lynette's family kept persistently searching for answers about her disappearance, despite no concrete leads coming to light for many years. Throughout this period, Dawson continued teaching at various schools, building a stable life with his new family, seemingly entirely detached from the suspicions still quietly surrounding his former wife's disappearance. For Lynette's two daughters, these years were an incredibly difficult time, growing up with a huge void left by their mother's absence, while their father built a new family of his own, a situation few children could ever easily accept or fully come to terms with. After years of investigation with no results, the New South Wales coronial system held its first formal inquest in February 2001. The Deputy State Coroner at the time found that Lynette Dawson had been killed by someone she knew, and recommended the matter be formally referred for prosecution. However, the New South Wales Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time assessed there was not enough evidence to secure a conviction at trial, and decided not to prosecute. By February 2003, a second coronial inquest was held, presided over by a different coroner. The finding was, once again, the same, recommending Chris Dawson be prosecuted over his wife's death. But the DPP, once again, declined to bring the case to trial, citing the same reason of insufficient evidence. For Lynette's family, this was the second time in a row they felt justice was almost within reach, only to have it slip away again, leaving hope of finding the truth feeling more fragile with each passing year. The very absence of a body and a concrete crime scene became the biggest barrier, making it difficult to bring a case to trial under ordinary evidentiary standards, despite every reasonable sign pointing in the same direction. Throughout both inquests, a number of key witnesses were called to give evidence, including members of the Dawson family and former colleagues of Chris from the school where he had once taught. Although this testimony helped build a fuller picture of what may have happened, it still wasn't enough to meet the evidentiary threshold required for a successful criminal prosecution, according to the DPP's assessment at the time. The period between the two coronial inquests and the case finally going to a formal trial spanned nearly 20 years, a clear demonstration that, sometimes, justice needs a powerful enough catalyst to overcome evidentiary barriers the traditional justice system struggles to resolve on its own. In 2018, Walkley Award-winning journalist Hedley Thomas of The Australian began releasing a 16-part investigative podcast series titled The Teacher's Pet. The series drew tens of millions of listens worldwide, uncovering and piecing together a huge volume of information and evidence that earlier official investigations had never fully gathered. The podcast's powerful reach sparked an unprecedented wave of public interest in a case that had seemed all but forgotten. Notably, several new witnesses voluntarily came forward with information to police after listening to the series, information that had never been recorded throughout decades of investigation before. Due to the sensitive nature of the case being reconsidered, the podcast series was later temporarily taken down from public release in Australia throughout the legal proceedings to help ensure a fair trial ahead. This has become one of the rare, most striking examples of the power of mass media in helping drive justice forward, after official channels had repeatedly stalled. Hedley Thomas, the journalist behind the series, spent months re-interviewing old witnesses, tracking down and cross-referencing documents, police files, and records from the two earlier coronial inquests to build the most complete and detailed picture of the case yet. The podcast series has since often been cited as one of the leading examples of the real-world impact independent investigative journalism can have on a case that had seemed completely stuck for decades. In April 2018, police formally asked the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to review the entire body of evidence in the case from scratch. Then, in September 2018, New South Wales Police carried out an excavation of the property that had once been the Dawson family home in Bayview, searching for new forensic evidence. By December 2018, Chris Dawson was arrested in Queensland, then extradited to New South Wales, and formally charged with the murder of his wife. He was granted bail while awaiting trial. In June 2019, Dawson formally pleaded not guilty before the court. A case that had seemed forgotten for almost 40 years, suddenly returning to formal legal proceedings, became one of the most talked about stories in modern Australian criminal justice history. The excavation at the Bayview property took place over several days, involving forensic and forensic archaeology experts, searching for any trace that might have remained after all those years. Although the excavation did not find Lynette's body, the process was still regarded as a necessary step, reflecting investigators' determination to pursue the case to the end, no matter how many years had passed since it occurred. Before the formal trial, Chris Dawson made several attempts to seek a permanent stay of proceedings, arguing the prosecution had been delayed for far too long, along with the risk that a jury may have already formed a bias due to how widely the podcast series had spread. A temporary adjournment was granted for a period, to allow public attention to settle before jury selection. But the application for a permanent stay was later dismissed by both the Supreme Court of New South Wales and the Court of Criminal Appeal. By May 2022, the presiding judge approved for the trial to be heard by judge alone, without a jury, citing how extensive the media coverage had been, making it difficult to select an impartial jury. The formal trial began on 9 May 2022, running continuously for 10 weeks, and concluded on 11 July that year. The prosecution built its entire case on a chain of circumstantial evidence, arguing Dawson's motive stemmed from a desire for a relationship no longer bound by his current marriage. The defense acknowledged Dawson may have let his wife down, but argued that Lynette had chosen to leave the family of her own accord and may have built an entirely new life somewhere else. The defense team also relied on testimony from several witnesses who claimed to have seen Lynette alive in the years after she disappeared. Chris Dawson chose not to give evidence in his own defense throughout the trial. Over the 10-week trial, dozens of witnesses were called one after another, including old friends, colleagues, and family members from both sides, each bringing a different piece to the overall picture of the marriage and Lynette's disappearance. Domestic and international media followed every development of the trial closely, with hundreds of articles published each week, reflecting the extraordinary level of public interest in this case, much of it stemming from the very effect the podcast series had created earlier. On 30th August 2022, after 5 hours setting out his reasoning in full, the presiding judge formally found Chris Dawson guilty. He found that Dawson had lied on multiple occasions about the true nature of his relationship with JC, about his genuine desire to reconcile with his wife, and about the phone calls he claimed to have received from Lynette after her disappearance. The judge entirely rejected the claims of people who said they had seen Lynette alive, finding this testimony to be wholly unreliable. He stressed there was an overwhelmingly convincing body of evidence to reject the theory that Lynette had left her family voluntarily. Ultimately, the judge stated he was satisfied, beyond reasonable doubt, that Lynette Dawson's death was the result of a deliberate, conscious act by her own husband. As soon as the verdict was announced, reaction from the public and media across Australia was almost explosive, as this was a result many had waited years to see, ever since the podcast series first brought this story back into public attention. For Lynette's family, the moment the verdict was read out was an enormously significant milestone, even as they understood that, even with a guilty verdict, the biggest question of all, where Lynette's final resting place was, remained unanswered. On 2 December 2022, Chris Dawson formally received a sentence of 24 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 18 years. Under this sentence, he will become eligible to apply for parole no earlier than August 2040. In delivering the sentence, the judge described Lynette as someone entirely without fault, undeserving of such a fate. He also found that the fact Lynette's body had never been found was an aggravating factor in the overall seriousness of the case. The judge also acknowledged Dawson's declining physical and mental health, then aged 74, and noted it was likely he would not live to see the end of his non-parole period. Outside the courtroom, Lynette's brother, Greg Sims, called on Chris Dawson to do the right thing at last, to reveal the location of Lynette's body, so the family could finally lay her to rest in peace. He shared that the journey to find justice for his sister still wasn't truly complete, with Lynette still somewhere the family could not know, and that what the family wanted most now was simply to bring her home, one last time. Alongside the main charge, Chris Dawson also faced another charge, relating to an unlawful sexual relationship with an underage student, from his time teaching at the high school where JC had been a pupil. The trial for this charge was held separately in May 2023 at a different New South Wales court. Dawson again pleaded not guilty to this charge. By late June 2023, he was formally found guilty. In September 2023, Dawson received a further 3 years in prison for this offence, with the non-parole period on his main sentence also extended by an additional year. This forms an important part of the overall picture of the case, showing more clearly the true nature of the relationship between Dawson and JC. Not simply a motive behind Lynette's death, but a relationship that had itself seriously broken the law from the very beginning. The court dealing with this charge, separately from the main murder case, also reflects a basic legal principle, that each offense must be considered and tried on its own nature and evidence, even where the two matters are closely connected in context. In May 2024, Chris Dawson took his case to the Court of Criminal Appeal in an attempt to overturn the conviction entirely. His legal team put forward various arguments, seeking to point out shortcomings in the original trial. However, on 13 June 2024, the Court of Appeal formally dismissed the appeal in full. The court reaffirmed once again that Chris Dawson had killed his wife, in order to clear the way for his relationship with his former underage partner to become an official, long-term one. With this ruling, Chris Dawson's sentence became legally final, closing out a legal journey spanning more than 40 years since the night Lynette disappeared. For Lynette's family, this dismissal of the appeal brought a certain sense of relief, no longer having to live with the fear the conviction could be overturned, after such a long journey to reach this outcome. This stands as a significant milestone, formally closing one of the most contested and closely watched cases in modern Australian criminal justice history. Looking back over this entire case, I think it's one of the most remarkable stories the channel has ever told. Not just because of its tragic nature, but because of how justice ultimately found its way, after such an almost unbelievably long journey. The first thing worth reflecting on is that two separate coronial inquests reached the exact same finding, the exact same recommendation to prosecute, yet both times were refused due to insufficient evidence. This raises a bigger question for the justice system as a whole. Whether the evidentiary standard in cases with no body may be unintentionally creating a gap where justice struggles to reach, even when every reasonable sign points in the same direction. And I also find it just as notable the role the public itself played in getting the case reopened. A podcast series, made by one independent journalist, was able to have a greater impact than the official investigative system had managed in more than 30 years. This is a powerful demonstration of the strength of mass media in the current age, but it also raises a question worth sitting with: whether justice should have to rely so heavily on public attention in order to be properly carried out. Honestly, I think the fact that Lynette's body has never been found is also an aspect worth reflecting on. Her family, even today, still cannot have a complete resting place to remember her, even though legal justice has been served. What do you think about this? Can a sentence, however severe, ever truly bring complete peace to a family, when the final question, where their loved one is, remains unanswered? And finally, I think the most thought-provoking part of this entire case is the gap between personal conviction and evidence that can be proven in court. For almost 40 years, so many people believed they knew what had truly happened to Lynette Dawson, but it took this long for that belief to finally become a formal, legally binding conviction. Some cases close with a body found, a scene examined, a story told in full, and some, like Lynette Dawson's, close with only a conviction, while the rest of the truth remains somewhere out there, known to no one. 40 years is an almost unimaginably long time for a family to live in waiting, caught between hope and despair, before finally receiving an answer, one that still leaves a gap that can never be fully filled. This story is also a powerful reminder of the value of persistence, not only from a victim's family, but from individuals outside the formal justice system, who chose not to let a story be forgotten, even after it had been shelved for decades. For anyone carrying an unanswered question about a loved one, Lynette's family's journey may offer something close to hope, that, however late it comes, the truth can sometimes still find its way home. It was a period long enough to witness justice slip away twice, seemingly within reach both times, before the truth was finally called by its rightful name. And perhaps the deepest lesson this story leaves behind isn't the 24-year sentence itself, but the journey to reach it. A journey showing that, however slow the system may be, however long evidence may remain missing, the truth, once it exists, will always find a way back into the light, one way or another. Before we close today's video, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this remarkable case. What do you think about a podcast series being able to have such a huge impact on a case that had seemed frozen for decades? And in cases with no body, like this one, how do you think the justice system should balance the need for solid evidence against not letting justice be delayed for too long? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd really love to read and discuss this case together with you. And if you found today's video worthwhile or thought-provoking, don't hesitate to share it with those around you, so this 40-year journey to find justice can continue to reach more people. If you or someone you know has experienced childhood sexual abuse, family violence, or is going through a mental health crisis relating to the disappearance of a loved one, please don't face it alone. In an emergency requiring immediate assistance, call 000 000, the National 1800 Respect Line for domestic and sexual violence, on 10737 732 Lifeline for crisis support and suicide prevention, on 13 to 1114 Full Stop Australia, supporting survivors of violence and sexual abuse, on 1800 385 578. Bravehearts, counseling and support specifically for survivors of childhood sexual abuse, on 1800 272 831. This content is based on real events made public through news reporting, court records, and official sources, including rulings from the New South Wales courts, for the purposes of information and to raise community awareness. Chris Dawson was convicted, and his sentence became legally final after his appeal was dismissed in June 2024.